All right, we are slowly but surely making progress on getting this rear clam to close. Peekaboo, there's the throttle body. Just gonna finish making some of these final cuts. Hi everybody, how are you? My name is Dan Dulac and welcome back to my channel where we are building a V10 powered Ultima Evolution convertible. This is episode number 42. If you're new to my channel and you've missed any of the previous episodes, be sure to go back into my channel. It's been about 2.5 years of this project, and 2023 will be the year that this car is on the road, so I am super excited. On this episode, we make a huge step forward. I finally get the rear clam fitted. I'm actually shooting this intro after I've completed the work. It took way longer than I expected, by the order of 4 or 5 days longer than I expected. So I've got a lot to show you. A little bit of tedious work involved. I tried to summarize it best in this video, but without further ado, let's jump right into it. All right, I've got the rear clam back on the car here. Pretty straightforward affair. And I'm getting ready to make a few more cuts so this thing will close. You can see here I've got 3.5 inches to come down. It will come forward as well a little bit. But let me show you where I've got to make some adjustment cuts. So first of all, over here, I actually think this will clear over the front of the intake plenum because it is going to come forward. But I'm going to trim just a little bit along there. You can see just at the edge of the tape line there, the lower edge of the tape line. I'll trim. So that's one piece. Then right now where it's currently hitting is right here on the intake plenum. This is the widest part of the intake plenum. Then it gets narrower as it goes up. So I'm going to take this up here all the way down, and then I've got to make room for the throttle body, which is right under here as well. So I'll cut out this little slot, and then under here, the splash guard here still interferes with the exhaust shield here. So I'm gonna just trim a little bit here, and then the same on the inside. Just a little bit extra there. And then I'll fiberglass in this corner splash guard again once it all fits. And then on the other side, similar thing, although the throttle body's inward. There's no throttle body on the outward side here, so I don't have to worry about throttle body. Again, the widest part of the intake plenum is right there. So I'm going to bring this all the way up here and make that slot bigger. So we're going to start with that. And of course, I still have to cut out the holes for my NACA ducts. So those will go on either side. And then, of course, the wing mounts I've got to cut holes for too. But my main goal and objective now is just to get this thing to close. Let's get on cutting this. All right, we are slowly but surely making progress on getting this rear clam to close. As you saw, I've been whittling away a little bit at a time and gradually lowering so I can only cut the minimal amount of fiberglass. But I'm low enough where I think I know the remaining bits I need to cut, and I'm just gonna go for it. So let me show you what I got here. I've got it all mapped out and traced out here on the car. So here, peekaboo, there's the throttle body, intake plenum, the widest part there, and it starts to narrow at this point forward. So you can see I've put on some masking tape, and I'm gonna cut the line that you see here. I've put on the white tape here is the center line of the body, as well as the center line exactly distance from the front to the back, so that I can create some symmetry here the best I can. But I am gonna have to cut what you see here, and that should allow this to close. We are getting pretty close here. The other piece that I'm gonna have to cut is this here, because the next thing this is gonna hit, it's probably 3 millimeters away, the top of the intake plenum from hitting this fiberglass. So I am gonna have to trim this back here some so that the plenum will stick up through. And then what I think I will do is take the clam off, reinforce this corner underneath with a bunch of layers of fiberglass, and that will reinforce that bit as well, because there is a latch here. This is more of a safety latch than anything. It's not bearing the brunt of the hold down pressure. That's done with the quick lock here on the body. So that's where we're at. You can see on this side as well, similar shape. As we transition to the front, I can go narrower, and then this is a 2-inch radius circle. This is a 3.5 diameter circle, and that should do it. And once I get this down, then I'll worry about what kind of workup I'm gonna do here, whether I'll just do like maybe a hexagon mesh or something here to cover that, bend it, get it in place, epoxy it in place, or I may 3D print a speed bubble here and just fill this in completely with a raised elevated speed bubble and do the same for the other side. So we'll figure that out after, but I'm really close here. Just gonna finish making some of these final cuts, and let's see if this thing closes. We are getting closer. We're about 2.5 inches away from this completely closing. And again, as this comes down, it does pull forward a little bit. So I've got about 1 inch to go forward. So let me show you where I'm at. Slowly but surely, as you've seen, making more gradual and gradual cuts, trying to keep my cuts as minimal as possible. So a couple things. Right now, the intake plenum is hitting on this scoop platform that's in here, and you can see where I've outlined where I think I'm gonna have to cut out so that the plenum will feed right into the scoop there. So I've got to make these cuts. Now I am worried as I cut this out, I'm gonna start losing strength in this section here across the scoop. And there is a latch here just to keep this closed. So I do need to preserve some strength here. So a couple of things I'm thinking about. Before I even cut this, and before I'm thinking about cutting this, where you see the green tape, you'll see that once I make room here to go down even further, my next point of interference is going to be right here. And given that this just has to go down an inch, about a forward bit, I'm thinking about making a cut that looks something like this. This might be a little bit too big. I'm going to refine this a little bit. I think I could probably shrink this back down a little bit. Basically, what this will allow me to do is have the kind of the bulkiest side of this intake plenum will simply drop down fully. So I've tried my best to kind of make it as symmetrical as possible just to give myself an idea of what I'm looking at here. So again, because I'm cutting out a lot of this material on both sides, I want to reinforce this center section with more fiberglass. It is pretty thin. You can see here how thin this is. And it is a little floppy. So I think I'm going to flip this, take the clam off, flip this whole thing upside down, and then reinforce this area a little bit here on the edges, and then this area here, reinforce it with fiberglass before I cut it, before I make my next rounds of cuts, just to give myself some extra strength and stability. I'm trying to figure out if I like the look of this or not, again, using tape just before I cut all this out. But my main goal here is to get this thing closed first, and then ultimately I'll figure out how I want to do my treatment in this area. Leave the engine exposed, do some formed black mesh over this to match the mesh that's going to go in these slots. That might look cool. Maybe make a mold and a form and create a fiberglass or carbon fiber speed bubble that goes over both sides here. Those things are up in the air, and I'll figure that out, whatever looks the best, but kind of does look cool with this exposed. The engine kind of sticking out there. It looks kind of neat. But anyways, we're getting close. My next goal here, let's get this clam off upside down on a couple of sawhorses, and then I will reinforce it with some fiberglass. All right, I've got the clam flipped over here upside down, a couple of sawhorses, and I already scratched the inner surface here with 40 grit, vacuumed up the dust. So you can kind of see what I'm after here. I'm basically along the outline here of this main bulge. I'm gonna just reinforce all of this with epoxy. In particular, this center section where, again, it's gonna get narrow as I make the additional cuts. I'm also, this is the back side of the latching, the center latch mechanism. I'm gonna fiberglass in this corner all the way in and around to really strengthen this end, because again, I'm gonna be cutting out some of this to make room for that plenum. So those are the two areas, kind of here, and then that center section, and I'll graduate it out to the edges. I think what I will also do is make sure that this area, this is a little bit flimsy, I'm gonna reinforce some of this as well. I mean, it's pretty thin here anyway, so it could use a little bit of thicker, I don't know, 4, 5, 6, 7 layers maybe. We'll see, we'll play this by ear, but that's what I'm after. So we need to mix up some epoxy and start laying some fiberglass. After overnight cure, we are fully solidified here. This epoxy is rock hard. Got a little trimming to do of a little bit of fiberglass left over here, but this is ready to go now. I'm gonna put this back on the car, and then I'm gonna trim out the rest of the areas that we need to do here to get this clam to close. So we're fully reinforced here in the corners, about 5, almost, I think 6 layers I put in here because again, I'm going to be trimming this to fit over the front edge of the intake plenum there, and then make somewhat of an hourglass shape here. So it's going to get about 5 inches wide here at the narrowest, but good reinforcement. This should really help with some strength in this as I continue to trim this down a little bit more to get it to close. So let's get it back on the car and finish up with our trimming here. Rear clam back on the car. Now we are ready to make some additional cuts. I think what I'm going to do is start with these two here, and then this will come down a little bit more, and then I'll fine tune what I'm going to do here. But I think this is the basic shape on both sides. And this slot will actually fall in between the intake runners and should fit nicely. So let's get after making these final cuts. Fingers crossed, this is all we gotta do. So close, getting there. All right guys, man, it's been like 3 days. I've been spending 5 or 6, maybe 8 hours a day on this rear clam, just whittling away, trying to minimize the amount of material I'm taking off. As you're about to see, I've got it literally this far from being completely closed, but I'm kind of at an interesting point. I've got a decision point to make here with regards to a remaining piece of the clam that I might end up cutting off. So let me show you what I've got here, and then I'll share with you what my final decision is here before I make these final cuts. So let's take a look. All right, so here is the rear clam. You can see we are almost completely shut. In fact, the hood pins are lining up perfectly. They just need to go down a little bit more. And I do have to adjust the hind joints in the back that this thing pivots on. But you can see where we're at here. So I've made a whole series of different cuts. Every time I hit an interference point, I make a cut. And you can see I've got still some tape lines here that I'm measuring out just to try to preserve as much symmetry as I can. And where it's hitting on now is right here. So literally this is the top of the scoop that was originally in the body. And now I need to go down maybe another 1/4 of an inch, but you can see where that scoop is just, the top of that scoop is just hitting. It's okay as we get towards the front because there's more height in the scoop, but as it slopes back, it starts to interfere with the intake plenum. Hence all the cutting, the drastic cutting I had to do back here. It's kind of an odd shape, the way this is. It kind of looks like an hourglass shape almost. What I'm thinking of doing is the following. Given that I do need to come down another 1/4 inch, plus I need to give room for some engine shake here, what I'm thinking of doing is cutting out what you see here on this tape. So here, a nice bend and curve straight back to meet up with this cut right here. So basically what that will do is that will expose this entire intake runner, which I think will be pretty cool. You remember I reinforced the fiberglass down this center spine here. So this is very, very rigid. This isn't touching anything and it's super rigid. So what I'm thinking is just preserving this center spine that will fall kind of in between the plenum there. And then if I decide I want to do some bent or molded mesh that I can put in here to cover this, I could do that, and it would kind of tie these sides, the sides of these openings up with the main, and maybe firm it up a little bit. That's kind of what I'm thinking currently. By doing that as well, it kind of gets rid of this kind of odd shape here. Again, just by trimming out this piece to expose that entire intake runner. That would then give me plenty of movement of the engine without interfering, and it would expose the Lamborghini script across the intake plenum as well, which I think would be a pretty trick. You can see what I ended up doing over here. I had to make room for the plenum to fall here underneath the spoiler, or sorry, the scoop, and then you could see there's plenty of clearance in there. I'll have, I don't know, maybe 1/2 inch, 3/4 clearance there. Once we get this fully closed, we are close. So close. That's currently where we're at. I don't think it'll look too bad once I clean that up a little bit. I also am going to cut along this tape line here, round this out, just to square it, just to straighten this line up a little bit. Same with this one here, because I am hitting on the rubber accordion hose there a little bit. So I just need to make some space there. It is a tight fit. I mean, this, on the convertible here, there's not a lot of engine bay room in there. With the coupe, the RS and the Evo coupe, it really comes up, it's way higher. It comes way up here and then slopes back. So had I done a coupe, there'd be no issue here, but because I did a convertible and the different body lines here in the back, much lower rear body, I actually prefer the look of the rear of the convertible, especially with the additional hardtop I'm gonna put on here. The T-top hardtop edition I'm gonna throw on there well, and I actually prefer the look of that. You can turn it into a coupe, but it has a different body line, which I really like. So we'll see that a little bit later down the road, but in the meantime, man, we are so close here. I've been working days at this. I haven't been filming too much lately just because of the tedious nature. Cut a little bit, try it, find a new interference point, trim a little bit more, find the next interference point, because I'm trying to remove as little of this fiberglass as necessary. But I think I have a plan here going forward, and I think that's what I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna cut out this kind of kidney-shaped piece here just to expose that runner all the way across on both sides. And leaving a center spine here, which is about 3 inches wide, and it's reinforced, remember, so it's quite rigid. It'll give me a place to, if I wanted to mold in some plexiglass, an attachment point, or a piece of mesh, hexagon mesh, similar to what's here on the intake. I could get some of this and make a press mold form and kind of form it around the plenum and mount it up. That might look pretty cool too. But anyway, we'll worry about that once I've got this hole finally cut so we can fully close this rear clam. So let's get after it. right, guys, I think I finally got everything trimmed out on this. 2 big holes at the top of this rear clam, and I think I finally got it. So here's the moment of truth. We are going to do a test fit here to see if this thing will finally close. So here we go, let's do this. Just clears the plenum. Yes, the sound of Eureka. Boom. Move over to the other side. This latch fits, a little push, and that locks in. Bingo, and then this center latch will close as well. There it goes. Bingo. So that's it. I think we finally got it. Now, I've got a few things to do here. I've still got to work on this piece. I still got to do a little bit of trimming here for this intake tube, and it turns out I am going to have to change up my intake track a little bit to minimize cutting of this very rear section. So that's why I've got some tape here. I'm going to try to figure out what to mark here to figure out what I need to cut. I'm not going to do that yet until I figure out what my solution is, because here's what I'm up against. From underneath, you can see the tops of those covers, the airbox covers, are just about 1 millimeter from hitting the rear clam. Same on the other side. So what I am going to do is I'm thinking about changing those covers, just creating a new cover that has a square opening versus a round opening, and then transitioning the square to a round cylinder tube up into the intake. So that's what I think I'm gonna do versus any other drastic measures. I think that's the easiest. Just create a couple of new covers, and that will give me clearance to run those pipes along here, and then these will bend down a little bit. I don't have to cut too much here. I think just a little bit. Half moon here on the other side. That'll give me enough clearance. Tubes will pass down and then into the new cover. So that is it. I think it looks pretty good. All the panel gaps line up pretty well. It closes. I've got the exhaust tips on there, and that clears when you rotate the clam, open it, rotate it backwards. But now it's starting to look like a real car. I think it looks pretty trick with the intake plenum exposed like this. And like I said, ultimately I may do a hexagon mesh, kind of form a hexagon mesh over this, glue that in. But for now, I'm just gonna leave it there as is. So pretty happy with it. This lets me move on to the next thing in the project.